I should have just believed her. My daughter had been restless for days, tossing and turning, telling me about some strange blue man that kept showing up at night. "It smiles, Mama. It's not like the way you smile at me," she said as her voice was trembling. "It's smile. It's not a nice one." I thought it was just her imagination. Children dream up strange things, right? I tried to comfort her, but every night she'd refuse to sleep. She'd keep crying, begging me not to let it come back. Her voice made me worried, but I brushed it off. Then one night I heard her scream something horrible. I rushed into her room only to find it empty, and it was so goddamn cold in there. Then I looked out the window and saw something I'll never forget as long as I live. Standing in the shadows was something tall, too tall. Two white eyes that glowed like lanterns looked into mine, and it had this grin on its face. This wretched smile that stretched from ear to ear with teeth jagged as rock and black as night. I couldn't even move. I couldn't breathe. It just stood there, staring at me. And then it was gone, like it melted into the air or something. Now all I know is that I can't sleep either, and for some reason I feel like it's still smiling at me. I should have just believed her.
Hello, and hello. I'm the S.O.C.K, aka Imagination, and I'm back at it with the next episode of Dude Brew. I've been working on this creature for about a week because the Oni from 2014 5th edition is literally one of my favorite monsters in D&D. I actually just recently discovered it about like a week or two ago, and I was just drawn to it for some reason. I did buy the new monster manual for the 2024 edition of 5e, and they definitely changed the Oni from its 2014 counterpart. First of all, it's a fiend now instead of being a relative to ogres, which are also related to giants, and the 2024 Oni sticks closer to the Oni from Japanese mythology, usually terrorizing towns that don't respect them or the spiritual world, which I think is cool, but it's different from the nightmare-fueled Jeepers Creepers monstrosity that the 2014 version is. So I chose to revise the 2014 Oni instead, since I like the art and the lore for it more, as you can see on screen. And I kind of just want to continue my thought before we get into it, but everything from the art to the mechanical design of the stat block itself for the 2014 edition does what a monster is supposed to do, which is invoke a certain theme or feeling, kind of telling a story on its own. I don't know why, but the Oni just, in TikTok terms, it's got that aura. You know, it almost gives me ancient European folklore vibes. I can imagine a European grandmother sitting by a campfire in the middle of a stormy night, telling her grandchildren about this monster, and if they don't behave, it'll disembowel them in the night. As a side note, though, if you want to be disturbed, look up some ancient fairy tales and folklore about monsters. I promise some mothers out there in ancient Europe just like cooked up the most fucked up story possible in order to get their kids to behave. Man, it's generally pretty cool, but actually still wild. With that being said, though, I do feel like the stat block and the lore for the 2014 Oni is kind of lacking, but it definitely has potential, and y'all are going to see what I did with that. But without making the intro any longer, there's going to be timestamps in the video for if you only want to hear a specific part. But let's analyze the lore and stat block of the original Oni from 2014 5th edition first. So getting into the 2014 version of the Oni, first, before we get into the lore and the stat block and everything, I just want to give another appreciation of this art right here. I had it on the screen in the beginning of the video and stuff, but the art really or the people that made the art knocked it out of the park, man. It just really has this creepy vibe for it, and the cloak kind of enhances its folklore sort of vibe and everything. Like, I can see this haunting a village. They still kept that in the 2024 book, with it being a fiend more so now and terrorizing towns in the more Japanese traditional sense. But this does feel like very hag-esque, which makes sense considering some of the lore we're going to read here. So, the Oni in nursery rhymes, and Oni are fearsome boogeymen that haunt the nightmares of children and adults alike. Yet they are very real and always hungry. They find human babies especially delicious. Oni look like demonic ogres with blue or green skin, dark hair, and a pair of short ivory horns protruding from their foreheads. Their eyes are dark with strikingly white pupils, and their teeth and claws are jet black. By the light of day, an Oni hides its true form with magic, gaining the trust of those it intends to betray when darkness descends. These creatures can change their size as well as their shape, appearing as humanoids as they pass through towns, pretending to be travelers, woodcutters, or frontier folk. In such a form, an Oni takes stock of the selection of humanoids in a settlement and devises ways to abduct and devour some of them. Oni are sometimes called Ogre mages because of their innate magical ability. Though they are only distantly related to true ogres, they share the ogre's habit of joining forces with other evil creatures. An Oni serves a master if doing so proves lucrative or provides it with a luxurious, well-defended home. Oni covet magic and they work for evil wizards and hags in exchange for useful magic items. So, what does this lore tell us about the actual creature? This is, like I said, these are boogeyman type creatures. Now, I know in previous editions that Oni were, while taken from Japanese mythology, they were, if I'm not mistaken, the same stat block as Ogre mages. And I only know about Ogre mages mainly from the old Baldur's Gate 1 and 2 games, when I know that was like an arena sort of thing where you had to fight like an Ogre mage and stuff. And sometimes they popped up throughout the game. But it definitely doesn't have any of that vibe here. Like, these things haunt towns and are almost a more dangerous and more interesting version of changelings to me. Like, you can still get all the vibes of changelings with this type of creature, but with the added horror of it as well. So I really like that sort of fact also, that they work for dark masters, but will only do so if it proves lucrative. So they will betray anybody, and it definitely has a very chaotic, evil sort of nature to it and stuff. But getting into the stat block, I won't take too much time with it. So looking at the Oni stat block, it's a large giant, lawful evil. I don't know if it's exactly lawful, since it doesn't have any set of principles or a code that it lives by, and it very much will just do whatever it can to satiate its sadistic sort of desires. So I don't know about lawful, but it has an armor class of 16 with chainmail. I don't know where it's wearing chainmail or getting somebody to make it for it. It's not a forge master or anything, but it has hit points of 110 with 13d10 plus 39 hit points. That's a very solid HP pool for the type of interaction that this creature usually is going to be. And it has a speed of 30 feet and a fly speed of 30 feet as well. I think that's very interesting that it has a flying speed, giving it, once again, that folklore sort of vibe that it's very supernatural. It has 19 strength, 11 dexterity, 16 constitution, 14 intelligence, 12 wisdom, and 15 charisma. For its saving throws, it has some pretty good saving throws of a +3 to dexterity saves, a +6 to constitution saves, a +4 to wisdom saves, and a +5 to charisma saves. Now, the actual numbers themselves are insanely high, but I just meant that it's good in terms of how it has proficiency in, a fair amount of them. But for skills, it's actually pretty interesting. It has a +5 to arcana, a +8 to deception, a +4 to perception as well. So very much a sort of mental, cerebral sort of creature and stuff. And next up, for its senses, it has dark vision of 60 feet. Makes sense. It has a passive perception of 14. So you definitely can still be snuck up on, but a very interesting sort of creature so far. And for its languages, it has common and giant, and it's a CR7 creature. So getting into its actual traits, it has innate spellcasting. So its spellcasting ability is charisma with a spell save DC of 13. Kind of one of my first problems with it. It's pretty low for a save DC, especially for CR7. The Oni can innately cast the following spells requiring no material components. At will, it can cast the Darkness and Invisibility spell, and once per day each, it can cast Charm Person, Cone of Cold, Gaseous Form, and Sleep. A semi-interesting list here. I like Cone of Cold for the sort of blue skin. It gives me like a frost sort of vibe, which I'll definitely get into. But Charm Person, Gaseous Form, and Sleep. Gaseous Form lets it sleep, sneak into places and everything and kind of kidnap children, like the sort of vibe that the creature has for its lore and stuff. But I won't take up too much time with that. Next up is magic weapons. So the Oni's weapon attacks are magical, and that's a very good way of making it sort of have some staying power at higher levels. And the last trait it has is regeneration. So the Oni regains 10 hit points at the start of its turn if it has at least 1 hit point. It has a multi-attack where it can make 2 attacks either with its claws or its glaive. Its claw can only be used in its Oni form, but it has a +7 to hit, and it hits for 1d8 +4 slashing damage. It also has a glaive, which is kind of a polearm, similar to like a naginata from Japanese mythology, but more of a medieval sort of a straight edge sort of weapon. But +7 to hit as well. It has reach of 10 feet. It does 2d10 +4 slashing damage in its regular giant form. It does 1d10 +4 slashing damage when it's in small or medium form. And speaking of which, it also has change shape as one of its actions. The Oni magically polymorphs into a smaller medium humanoid, into a large giant, or back into its true form. Other than its size, its stats are the same in each form, and the only equipment that is transformed is its glaive, which shrinks so that it can be wielded in humanoid form. If the Oni dies, it reverts to its true form, and the glaive reverts to its normal size. So the stat block is very good. I won't act like that the stat block is ass or anything like that. It's definitely better than a lot of the other 2014 stat blocks and everything. But I feel like with the flavor that it has, and then the mystical sort of supernatural vibe that this stat block and the lore gives me, I feel like it definitely could be expanded upon. So we're gonna get straight into my rework of the lore and stat block of this creature. And just like with all monsters, there are a couple questions that need answering, with the first one being, what is an Oni? The link for the document with my lore and the stat block are going to be in the description and also on the screen right here. But to understand the incarnation of bitterness and evil that is the Oni, you need to understand their origins first. Long ago, the first Oni was an ogre that was born malformed and hideous, with sickly skin and a presence that disturbed even other ogres. It was abandoned in the frozen wastes, left to die. Wandering the desolate winters, this ogre was rejected by all tribes he encountered, giant and ogre alike, and as this ogre lied dying in the snow, he felt nothing, only rage against his cursed existence. Then he felt something whisper to him, something old, older than the world itself, and it offered a choice. A meaningless death for reasons he could never control, or the power to punish a reality that had doomed him from the very start. So with a scream that echoed throughout the land, the first Oni was created, reborn into a twisted vessel of cursed frost, with teeth and claws black as obsidian, twisted into a shape that the Oni had never made before in its previous life. A smile. What was once a cold void that reeled in the pain of abandonment became the foundation of the curse that afflicts all Oni. Hatred, self-loathing, and a never-ending hunger to devour the warmth they were denied from birth. Oni use their ability to shapeshift to infiltrate towns and cities, assimilating themselves into the community while in search of one specific kind of flesh that they crave above all else, the flesh of loved children. Children who are drowned in attention and given happy lives by their parents are what the Oni hates most. To an Oni, children who are loved and cared for represent everything they could never have. So they bide their time, slowly whittling down their intended target by using their innate magical abilities to suddenly appear in front of them, flashing a smile that burns the image of it into the victim's mind. The sick part about this is the Oni smile carries a curse. Those who see it can't sleep until the curse is broken. That twisted abomination of a smile is a weapon that the Oni uses, along with its ability to enter the dreams of their targets. It does this to maximize and extend the suffering of their target, driving them to the brink of insanity. And just when the target seems to be breaking, the Oni shows up one last time to take them away, either eating them slowly or using their cursed claws to freeze the victim into a frozen statue, capturing the final terrified expressions of their victims as a twisted gallery that it gazes at occasionally with sadistic glee. Despite their cunning and powerful nature, there's actually a small number of Oni compared to most monsters, and there's two main reasons for this. The first is that the Oni doesn't reproduce in the traditional sense. When a female Oni consumes enough children, a partial amount of the anguished souls of their victims gathers into a dark consciousness, and the female Oni instinctively seeks out the nearest male Oni. After they meet, they both perform a dark ritual only known to the Oni themselves. Afterwards, the new Oni child is born. The birth of this new Oni displays the second reason for their low population, and that's the fact that the Oni despise their own appearance, usually abandoning the newborn and the other adult Oni immediately. This self-hatred forever causes the cycle to continue, guaranteeing that each Oni is going to inherit this violent curse their ancestor accepted long ago. Oni are frequently in service to dark lords, or can be found frequently in the service to dark lords and evil gods, working as assassins or enforcers in exchange for magic items and chances to satisfy their bloodlust. They're not loyal servants or anything though, and they'll easily betray their masters if they don't find their servitude profitable anymore. So, specifically, what does this lore address with my problems with the creature? My problems with the original version of the creature is I felt like it had potential. I don't feel like the lore is specifically given as much flavor as it could have. Like, look at this creature right here. This isn't a creature with a simple story. Like, yeah, you could just do the thing where it's just evil just because, or it's just predatory just because, but why does it eat human babies specifically? Like, yeah, that makes it more demented, but for hags specifically, they do that as a sort of, like, twisted ritual to turn them into hags or more hags, as you know, they have their own thing going on with it. But usually when it's something that demented, there's like some sort of reason behind it that adds a little bit more of a sinister edge to it. So these creatures, yeah, they have a tragic origin, but they also are still sadistic and evil creatures and stuff. So I wanted to give their sort of strange craving an actual origin point and everything that makes them more interesting characters, quote unquote, and stuff. Something that gives the players or the DM something to some information about the creature's mindset and the way they think, as they are very bitter creatures that crave and snuff out things that they can never have, but it's because they specifically choose not to have it. Like I said, Oni in my revised work hate their own appearance. Kind of their usual personality and backstory ties into their actual abilities. They can change their shape like they wish they always could, or the way that the first Oni always wishes they could change their shape, since they were born that way and born hideous and abandoned. And since because they know they were abandoned because of their appearance, that's why they can change shape. What's another one? They specifically eat human babies for the reasons that we talked about before. They crave this connection that they were never given from birth, and they despise it, but they don't have the actual ability to provide that for themselves. So it's just this never-ending cycle of hatred. I think that makes the creature a lot more sinister and a lot more evil. On top of that, the Cursed Frost as well kind of symbolizes their cold existence, their cold, lonely existence, actually. But yeah, I won't ramble too much into it. We're definitely going to get into the stat block for this right away. Getting into the stat block, I'm actually very proud and excited to show off this this redesign that I did. But the Oni is a large giant, neutral evil. I feel like it strikes that middle ground between lawful and chaotic, so I think neutral made more sense. It's a pragmatic killer. It's not going to do anything like challenge an entire party full of, you know, seasoned adventurers and stuff to death combat and stuff. It's going to have a very sort of cerebral way of doing it, sort of stuff. And I also imagine that it has a little bit of those chaotic aspects as well, being that it will easily betray its masters that it's serving in exchange for its hunger. It's kind of a creature that prioritizes the self more than whatever goal that it's doing and stuff. And yeah, I won't get ahead of myself, but part of the reason I did neutral evil as well is I do feel like there's a little bit of chaotic nature to it, being that they break into homes and stuff. But I almost feel like that they would be wandering around in towns in its, you know, quote unquote humanoid form and stuff, kind of reveling in the chaos of the, you know, watching the townspeople sort of freak out after what's happening in the nighttime and stuff. But that's besides the point. Its armor class is 17. It has a natural armor of +6 added to its AC. I kind of reasoned that this is a vessel of cursed frost, so its body is almost kind of like rigid and ice-like, or its skin might be and everything. But it definitely doesn't have chainmail, so yeah. I kept its hit points the same, kept its movement speeds the same as well. I thought the flying speed was very good for the vibe of this creature, but the main differences are going to be in the stats here. So the stat total is only like 1 point higher, but I kind of changed around some of the other stuff. So instead of a strength score of 19, it has a strength score of 18. It has a dexterity score of 12, as that's where I took the point off and added it into. Its constitution score is, I'm pretty sure, still 16, the same as the other stat block. And it has intelligence score of 14, a wisdom score of 12, and it has charisma score of 16. Just a slight buffs to its stats and everything, just to better encapsulate the type of creature that I feel like we're dealing with here. I don't think it's as lumbering, and I don't see it as like some sort of acrobatic, super quick creature, but it definitely would be quicker than your average troll or giant and everything, being that it sneaks into homes. So it does do stealth, and that's going to come up in a second. But for its saving throws, I did increase its proficiency bonus by +1. So I'm gonna get into it, but I guess I'll probably just address it here. So I did take out challenge rating. I don't think I'm gonna be doing challenge ratings or any sort of like tiering system for monsters. I feel like monsters specifically, you know whether the creature is gonna be a boss monster or not and everything. So I kind of just build it with the proficiency bonus in mind. And that usually will indicate the level of creature you're dealing with. So it's a +4, which indicates that it is very much above your average minion monster and everything. But I made it so it can be a recurring villain at mid levels. It can be a boss monster itself at lower levels if you're doing more of a horror type of game and stuff. And it also could be a minion for higher level characters and everything to deal with. But yeah, for its saving throws, it has a dexterity score of dexterity saving throw of +5. It has +7 to its constitution saving throws. It has +5 to its wisdom saving throws, and it has +7 to its charisma saving throws. So that's a lot better with that's the reason why I changed the stats around a little bit. Its saving throws are a lot better and let it survive more, particularly dexterity and wisdom. I felt like should be a little bit higher with how mentally adept this creature is and stuff. So I felt like the proficiency bonus increased by +1 also helped, but definitely gives it some staying powers. It's going to have some pretty decent averages as far as mathematics goes with its saving throws. It has a +6 to Arcana checks, a +11 to Deception checks with expertise in Deception. I feel like that made sense. And it has a +5 to Perception and a +5 to Stealth. It doesn't have any damage vulnerabilities or resistances, but it is immune to cold damage, as I did preface that it is a creature or a vessel of cursed frost. It doesn't have any condition immunities, but getting into its senses, it has dark vision of 60 feet and true sight of 30 feet. It also has a past perception of 15. So this is a creature that consistently tricks and deceives its victims and stuff. So I feel like true sight made sense, especially for the nature, this dark supernatural nature that I'm trying to give this creature and everything. Its languages are common and giant like before, and then like I said, its proficiency bonus is +4. Getting into its traits, it has innate spellcasting. Spellcasting ability is still charisma. Its spell save DC, however, has been bumped up to 15 with a +7 to hit with spell attacks. That gives it a lot more. Like, yeah, higher level characters probably going to be succeeding those saving throws, but at least makes it so they could possibly fail and stuff, unless it's a particularly high saving throw that they're very good at and everything. But regardless, I feel like this gives it so where lower level characters are going to have a hard time succeeding against certain types of these saving throws and stuff that it enforces. But the +7 also makes it so it can decently hit higher level characters as well. But it can innately cast the following spells requiring no material components. At will, it can cast Darkness, Invisibility, and Ray of Frost. I added Ray of Frost just to give it a ranged option. And 3 times per day each, it can cast Misty Step and Ice Knife. This gives it its maneuverability from Misty Step since it's a bonus action. And then Ice Knife gives it a ranged attack that can also turn into an area of effect sort of ability. But it can also cast once per day each Confusion, Cone of Cold, Gaseous Form, Mirror Image, and Dream. Confusion is just to have, it's a small area of effect, but if you're going up against, for example, the marshals that are crowding around this thing, it has confusion on them to make them go insane, and they can start targeting your casters in the back and stuff. Cone of Cold stayed because it made sense for the theming of this creature, and also is a very good area of effect sort of thing that can unleash against the party if it's cornered, or start off the combat with that to butter them up and stuff. Gaseous Form is for escape mainly and infiltration, so I like that sort of spell and I kept that there. And then Mirror Image is to make it so it can actually have some staying power. If it does, if it is forced to fight the party and everything, Mirror Image is going to give it some staying power. And then Dream lets it terrorize the party and terrorize its victims days before, or leading up to the actual day of interacting with the Oni and stuff. And it definitely makes sense for this boogeyman sort of vibe that it has and everything. I took out Charm Person, and I think I also took out the Sleep spell. You can keep those in if you want, but they're not super relevant when you get to sort of higher tiers, and I specifically don't like Charm Person, really, at least for me as a DM. That's a whole different discussion, but it's the same thing I did with the Vesper Dragon, how I gave it more of a passive sort of trait to simulate charm and stuff. As I feel like that's more of a role play sort of feature than something that just dominates what the character thinks and everything, but that's a whole side tangent. Its next trait is Magic Weapons, so the Oni's weapon attacks are magical. I kept that once again gives it some staying power at higher level. Its next trait is Glowing Eyes. The Oni's wide eyes sometimes glow with eerie malevolence. It has true sight up to 30 feet and it has dark vision up to 60 feet. So this is a creature that's casting darkness and trying to cast illusions, or not cast illusions, but do things to deceive the party. So like I said, I think that makes sense and gives it a cool vibe that'll also help with this mechanics later on. It also has regeneration, so it regains 10 hit points at the start of its turn if it has at least 1 hit point. If the Oni takes fire damage, however, the trait doesn't function at the start of the Oni's next turn. So that gives it a little bit of a weakness. It is a Cursed Frost sort of creature, so the fire kind of disables its regeneration for a little bit. Next up is Sneak Attack. So once per turn, the Oni deals an extra 2d6 damage when it hits a target with a weapon attack and has advantage on the attack roll, or when the target is within 5 feet of an ally of the Oni that isn't incapacitated, and the Oni doesn't have disadvantage on the attack roll, so just the rogues feature. And this definitely makes sense for the trickster ambush sort of creature that the stat block and the actual lore for it gives and everything. It's not going to blindly fight you like a regular ogre, it's going to try to pick you off, so it's an opportunistic sort of hunter. In its last trait, which is honestly my favorite one, kind of a give the players a what the fuck moment, it's called Spell Thief. So once per day, if the Oni is targeted with a spell, it can choose to make an Arcana check as a reaction. The DC for this check is equal to 13 plus the spell's level. On a success, the Oni temporarily learns the spell, becoming able to cast the spell once within the next hour. Later, the Oni can make another Arcana check if it has at least 3 hours to practice. The DC for this new Arcana check is increased by +3. If the Oni succeeds on this second check, it permanently learns the spell and can cast it once per day. On a failure, the Oni loses memory on how to cast the spell. The Oni can only have a maximum of 3 additional learned spells at a time. I didn't type the at a time part, but I just said that for clarity. But yeah, it's a once per day ability, so it could save this for a particularly nasty spell that the party is casting on them. Like, picture if it succeeds on the saving throw and it says, yeah, I'm going to try to learn this one. It can always be using the magic from its Dark Lord to kind of like the party sees that it's congealing the magic into its hand. It's like one small orb, and it disperses throughout its body as it clasps its hands together. And that can simulate or illustrate to the players that it's absorbing the magic that is being cast against it and everything. I think that gives it a cool vibe as well. And also try to tie into the lore that 2014 version gave, that it accepts magic items. So it's interested in magic, which I think is pretty cool. And I think this trait gives that vibe for it. But it has a maximum of 3 additional learned spells, so it can't just get a full Lich's spell catalog and everything, as it is still a, martial caster, that sort of thing. That's the balancing effect that it has. But the DC for the check is 13 plus the spells level. You honestly could just remove this if you want. It's a once per day ability, so if you just want your Oni to just be able to absorb a certain spell that the party casts against it without making the check, then that's perfectly fine. But I did this just to make it so there's some risk reward aspect to it for you as a DM, or whether you want to use this reaction for that. But yeah, so 13 plus the spells level makes it easier to not cast, but be able to memorize the casting of a lower level spell, and then that makes it so it can't just automatically get one of their 9th level spells that cast against it or anything like that. If it does survive a 9th level spell, that is. But yeah, getting into its actions, it has multi-attack, and it can make 2 attacks. Or first, let me preface, the Oni can use its Oni Smile and makes 2 attacks, using a Claw, Glaive, or Bite in any combination. So its Claw can only be used in its Oni form like always. It has a +8 to hit, does 1d8 plus 4 slashing damage, but the change I made here is, on a hit, the target must make a DC 15 Constitution saving throw or begin to freeze. The target can remake the saving throw as an action on their turn. The target has advantage on the saving throw for the next minute after they succeed on the saving throw from this effect. On the first failure, the target gains the grapple condition. On a second failure, the target becomes restrained. On a third failure, the target becomes petrified in ice. The target can only be unfrozen/unpetrified by having the Remove Curse, Greater Restoration, or Wisp spell cast on them within the next 24 hours. I'm going to try not to go on a rant for each new feature I made, because I feel like I'm doing that. But like I said, this is an interesting stat block, so if you don't like the explanations, just skip it. But the inspiration that I had for this, skip if you care about spoilers for One Piece, specifically in the One Piece Wano arc, if you haven't seen that part of the anime. But I got this inspiration for this claw attack from not only his blue skin, but also from the anime. There were certain sections where there were these quote-unquote Oni, and every time they bit or like slashed you and everything, this frost started covering over your body and turning you into the Oni. It doesn't turn you into the Oni here, but I figured it would make sense that, especially with the lore that it collects frozen statues of the terrified faces of its victims, it slashes you and it starts, you see the wound, there's this sort of magical ice that starts spreading from the wound and everything, and that has a very intimidating sort of vibe to it as well if you end up being petrified. There is a way to get out of it, though, as it is a curse, so I try to give it a way out for the players, but I think that's very threatening. You do get advantage once you succeed on the saving throw from this effect, or if you succeed at all, so that is the balancing fact to it, but you still have to worry about potentially freezing when this thing slashes you. Next up is its Glaive. Same thing as before, +8 to hit, reach 10 feet. It does 2d10 plus 4 slashing damage in its giant form, 1d10 in its smaller medium form. But the weapon now scores a critical hit on a d20 roll of 19 or 20. I would imagine that because it has a penchant for magic items and magic weapons and all that, that the glaive that it wields would be a magical weapon as well, considering its weapon attacks are considered magical. So I thought a crit threat range of +1 would be a pretty cool thing for it. But next up is the bite. Didn't have a bite before, but it has this big shark-like sort of maw, so I think that makes sense. +8 to hit, does 1d6 plus 4 piercing damage, not that much damage, but on a hit, the target reduces their movement speed by 5 feet to a minimum of 5 feet and cannot take reactions. This lasts for 1 hour or until the creature receives magical healing or takes fire damage. This is just to simulate as, it's not as cursed as its obsidian claws or anything like that, but its black teeth kind of biting into you carries a little bit of this curse and everything, so it makes it harder for you to run away. I kind of imagine that it kind of Rottweiler kind of shakes around its jaw a little bit as it bites onto you to create this lasting wound. But yeah, it could be healed pretty quickly from somebody casting a little small healing spell on you and all that stuff. But still a debilitating wound that the Oni's bite gives. Next up is its change shape ability, which stays the same as before. It can turn into a smaller, medium humanoid. And lastly, for its new trait or new action that I gave it, it's called Oni Smile, which is specifically referenced in a little fairy tale section that they made for the creature in the original 2014 book. The Oni forms a wicked smile that freezes even the bravest adventurer. One creature the Oni can see within 30 feet of it must make a DC 15 Wisdom saving throw. On a failure, the target gains the frightened condition until the end of their next turn and becomes cursed until removed by Remove Curse, Greater Restoration, or Wish spell. While cursed, the target gains no benefit from finishing a short or long rest, and on a success, the target is immune to this Oni smile for 1 hour. So this Oni smile functions a lot similar to the Yeti from, I don't know if that's how it works in the 2014 book, but the Yeti in the 2024 book specifically, I know, has this chilling gaze. So I flavor affected similar to that in terms of the mechanics and everything. But yeah, they specifically talk about the Oni smile in a little like homemade nursery rhyme that they made for the Oni in the 2014 book. So I think it makes sense for the type of creature that it is, that it forms this smile that's so wicked that it burns the image of it into the person's mind with a curse and everything, which gives it that more of that supernatural vibe that it already had before and stuff. That also lets the Oni wear down a target over time and everything. Like imagine, you're going through sleep deprivation and this thing is in the corner of your eye every single night. You're going to start going crazy and eventually thinking that it's there anyway, even when it's not. And that's what the Oni wants, is to delight in your suffering and everything. And for the mechanical side of it, it smiles at you and gives you the frightened condition. But, once you pass it, you can steel your mind against it, but it's still disturbing, which I think is pretty interesting. If you want to preface that it wasn't an illusion that the player went through. Maybe they were like, taking a piss or something like that during the rest and everything. They see this Oni smile at them and they fail that wisdom saving throw. Nothing happens combat wise. They just can't go back to sleep. They don't gain the benefit of a rest. And that is going to give a greater indication as something is seriously wrong going on and stuff. And that also could make it so the party has to seek out help from some sort of like hag or like, some sort of local necromancer, whoever has the ability to remove curses or research the source of curses. Would be an interesting little subplot for this creature to force you to go on. But yeah, no, this feature specifically is more of a long-term sort of detriment that it has. But yeah, it can do this Oni smile and do 2 attacks afterwards just to give it a threatening vibe. And real quick, I just wanted to address the optional features section that I had right here. I'm going to be adding this for certain monsters that I feel like do have the potential to be a boss, but the actual base stat block isn't really a boss type creature. And I didn't want to make a full separate stat block for the boss version, but if you guys want me to make one, I definitely could make a boss version of the Oni stat block and stuff. I'll probably just say you can just increase the damage of the sneak attack damage and stuff and just raise its DCs a little bit or raise its stats and stuff, as I do feel like the creature itself already has the foundation for a boss monster. I don't know what other features I would necessarily give it, but that's besides the point. For the optional features, if you want to make this creature a boss monster, or like a mini boss sort of thing, like the number 2 to the BBEG, you can give the Oni 2 legendary resistances a day, and then use the legendary reactions I've written down below for inspiration. For its legendary actions that I made for the Oni to potentially use, it can take 3 legendary actions, choosing from the options below. Only 1 legendary action option can be used at a time, and only at the end of another creature's turn. Similar, same legendary action rules. The Oni can spend, or the Oni regains spent legendary actions at the start of its turn. The first legendary action it has access to costs 1 action, and it's called Night Haunter. The Oni casts the Darkness spell, and this kind of aids to its true sight of 30 feet. It can cast Darkness as a legendary action and then revel in the chaos as it sees everything that's going on in there and sneak inside of that darkness area, hit somebody for the sneak attack, potentially cursing them with its claws and stuff. I'm just imagining the party gets kind of like engulfed in darkness after entering the Oni's lair and stuff, and they don't know what the hell is going on, but somebody gets slashed and they fail their Constitution saving throw and they start freezing. They can't see it, but they start freezing. And it's magical darkness as well, so that would make it very intimidating even for your characters with dark vision. Next up is Sweeping Glaive, which costs 2 legendary actions. The Oni whirls its glaive around in a circular motion. All creatures within 15 feet of the Oni must make a DC 18 dexterity saving throw. On a failed save, affected creatures take 2d10 slashing damage and fall prone. If a creature fails the saving throw by 5 or more, they obtain a gaping wound, causing them to take 1d6 necrotic damage at the beginning of their turns. A DC 16 medicine check using an action or magical healing closes this wound. Creatures only take half damage and suffer no additional effects on a successful saving throw. This is just to give it an option just in case it's getting swarmed and everything. It can't exactly cast Misty Step in the middle of its legendary action, which, I mean, that'll come up in a second, but I'm spoiling myself. But this is just a way to guarantee doing damage to everybody in the area, as even if you have super high dexterity, unless you have the evasion trait, you're going to be taking at least some damage here. And if you fail really badly, this could be the Oni taking revel in the violence that it's causing, kind of slashing deeper against you specifically. So now you have this gaping wound on your shoulder or your stomach or something. But next up is Sudden Death, which costs 3 legendary actions. The Oni casts Misty Step with a doubled range for the spell. It can choose to make a claw attack against the creature within 5 feet of it before or after it teleports. So this is just one claw attack before or after. It's not both. But I think this definitely makes sense for it to cost 3 legendary actions. Is I don't want it to just be able to teleport 5 times around and everything. But there is the benefit of the Misty Step is doubled when it casts it as a part of this legendary action and everything. You can decide whether you want it to cost one of its 3 times per day casting of Misty Steps. I feel like that made it a little bit too overpowered if it could just teleport without using one of its uses of Misty Step. But you could always do that if you want it to be a little bit more of a bigger deal and everything, as this kind of sells the trickster sort of sneaky vibe that this creature has as far as the way that it hunts. But yeah, doubled range for the spell, so that's 60 feet of a Misty Step, and then it can slash somebody before or afterwards. But yeah, that also could trigger its sneak attack depending on where it's teleporting into. Like, what if it casts darkness and then waits until it's start of its next turn and then teleports into that darkness area to slash somebody? But yeah, so getting it so you can actually use the Oni in your game. This creature is built to make a small quest around in a campaign as a recurring villain or as a servant to the final villain that the party's going to go up against down the line. I tried to redesign it to be relevant in all tiers of play with that in mind, actually. And if you want to make it a boss monster, the legendary resistances and legendary actions are going to give it the extra bump in difficulty that you need for that. You could also still run with the lore of it being an ogre mage like in past editions. The ogres usually pride their societies off of slavery, so maybe the Oni is demanding a certain amount of human children to eat as payment for its leadership. And the ogres played along with this at first, raiding villages and stuff to secure the Oni's demand, but eventually this causes the warband to have a hefty bounty put on their heads. After all, there's no quicker way to make yourself the target of a community than by posing a threat to the youth. And this is why the party could possibly come in to assist the village. Maybe they were asked to assist the village specifically for this reason, or they just passed by after one of the attacks, or during an attack if you want to have that be a starting section for your campaign. The party has to track down the camp of the Ogre Warband, which can present environmental hazards depending on where they are. And as they get closer, they notice this lone figure watching from the distance. This could be their first interaction with the Oni, actually, now that I think about it. Maybe it uses its Oni smile to disappear, or it uses Oni smile then disappears is what I mean. Or it uses the dream spell to torment the most vulnerable player during arrest. After all, you only need to know of the person in order to cast the dream spell on them, so you definitely could periodically do that while the players are traveling through this area, depending on how big the forest is that is nearby, or the wilderness, wherever it is. Regardless, the party eventually finds the camp and they try to start sneaking in to free the slaves, or they could just defeat the Ogre Warband first, depending on how gung-ho the party is, unless they're higher level or something. Warband of Orcs is actually going to be a pretty significant threat for them. It's going to be an insane reveal, though, to find out the leader isn't just some hulking oafish giant, or like a hill giant, or like a ogre. It's a demented monster of cursed frost. I'm just imagining they go into the lair of this Oni. Maybe they could be a cage where one of its former slaves were and everything. But they walk in and see this like crying person, kind of like malnourished and sitting in the cage and stuff. And they go to free this person, walk out and everything, since they don't find any Oni there or any leader that the ogres have been discussing before. And then in the middle of the nighttime, or as they're walking out of this dark cave, it could shift into this giant hulking blue monstrosity that it is, and then bite one of the players to start off initiative. That would be a crazy way to reveal not only its shape-shifting abilities, but also its evil and sinister nature and reveling in the actual like ethical and moral like evil that it's committing and stuff. So as a side note though, if you want to give lower level players a chance to actually survive in this scenario against an admittedly strong group like an Ogre Warband, you could have it so the Oni has been getting greedy recently, demanding more and more human children to feast on, eventually resorting to eating the Ogre slaves that they feel like they aren't meeting expectations. And some of the Ogres could become resentful towards their leader for this, but haven't rebelled yet due to the magical might of the Oni and the fact that they're the leader and stuff. And the ogres aren't smart, but maybe they could be convinced to rebel against the Oni by the players themselves, or the players could covertly try to start a coup and wait for the fight to end and fight the Oni or the remaining warband members, depending on who's left and stuff. But either way, they're going to be weakened after this, and this would give it a good way to make the players actually feel like they did something by making these ogres kind of resist against each other and then the Oni and stuff. This could cause a whole civil war and stuff, so it depends on how you want to play it as a DM, but that definitely is a way to give the players some agency and being able to do something, being that they can't just fight a whole band full of ogres and stuff. Is I think ogres are CR7 or something like that, so if you have like a good 20, 30 ogres and everything, that's going to be pretty rough for them to try to fight against, but that's besides the point. I feel like this sort of This sort of setup for the Oni, though, gives it a setup as a recurring villain wanting revenge against the players if it does escape. And it's a very intelligent monster, so it won't face certain death if it knows it's going to die in a certain scenario and everything. So maybe it sees that the party were the ones that caused this descent among the Ogre warband, or were the ones to make it have to kill its entire warband and stuff in the night. That depends on how you want to play it, but that gives the Oni a very good reason, other than the fact that it's evil, to hate the players and constantly show up again and again. Being that it can shapeshift and it's very intelligent, so it could track down the party and stuff. And like I said, if it works for a Dark Lord like a Lich or I'm trying to think of a Frost entity. It could be a dragon, like a white dragon or something. Like any Frost-based entity, I feel like fits really well with this type of creature. But honestly, you could have this work for a hag as well. Like I said in the 2014 book, they definitely meet the criteria for creepiness that is going to be like a hag type association and everything. So I think it would be pretty cool if you tied the lore of them in your game to the hags, as well as they do have that not weird magic vibe, but it very well could have been morphed by weird magic, which is something that hags use and stuff. But a lot of potential, I feel like, for this creature, and I really hope you guys enjoyed this video and enjoyed the content that I'm making and stuff. If you have a specific creature that you like me to rework, I don't think I'm going to be doing reworks all the time. I like making original monsters more, but if it's a creature that I think is super dope and doesn't have a whole bunch of fleshed out sort of material for it and stuff, I'll definitely give it a crack at making a stat block. So go ahead and put that in the comments. And like I was saying, like, comment, and subscribe if you like this video, and peace out.